I stood behind a row of slot machines in the Aurelius Casino on the Las Vegas Strip, in a suit I had bought at an airport retail store in Phoenix, because I had left my apartment in the clothes I was wearing when I saw the empty office. And I watched Mark exchange the last of what had been my family's future for a stack of casino chips the color of old money. He looked good. That was the thing that landed with the specific weight of an observation you weren't expecting. He looked rested and relaxed, and like a man who had arrived at a place he believed he deserved to be, his shoulders carrying the ease of someone who has shed a burden rather than acquired one. The chips in his hands were my daughter's college fund and the down payment on the house Sarah and I had been saving toward for 6 years, and the emergency reserve I had built slowly, transfer by transfer, out of a discipline that had never come easily, and that I had maintained through the specific, sustained belief that it was building toward something real. He stacked them at the felt table with the practiced confidence of someone who had done this before, or had imagined doing this before with enough frequency that the imagination had become a kind of experience. He said something to the dealer that made the dealer smile. In my jacket pocket, my phone was showing a notification from the tracking API. Not an alert, just the quiet, continuous confirmation of a system doing what it was designed to do, triangulating the wallet's signal against 3 public networks in the casino's infrastructure, and returning a coordinate that was accurate to within 11 feet. 11 feet. He was 11 feet from where I was standing, and he had no idea. And in approximately 40 minutes, the 2 men in tailored suits who had entered the casino from the east entrance were going to reach the table, and the federal agents outside were going to execute the warrant I had provided at 7 that morning. And Mark was going to discover that the digital wallet he had used to move my money was not the secure instrument a man in his position needed it to be. I wasn't going to be there when it happened. I had watched him for 3,000 miles, and I had done what I came here to do, and the rest of it belonged to processes that didn't require my presence. I turned and walked toward the exit. To understand how a childhood friendship became a 3,000-mile hunt that ended on a casino floor, you have to go back to the coffee shop and the numbers on a napkin, and the morning I woke up to find that the person I had trusted most in the world had been gone for 8 hours. Mark Calloway had been in my life since we were 9 years old, which is the kind of duration that stops feeling like a fact about a relationship and starts feeling like a fact about yourself. Something so integrated into the structure of who you were that its presence was invisible in the way that air is invisible, noticed only in its absence. We had grown up on the same street in the same mid-sized city in the Midwest, attended the same schools, shared the specific, formative experiences of a friendship that predates identity formation and therefore becomes part of it. We had been in each other's wedding. I was in the room when his daughter was born, and he was in the room when mine was, and the specific, private quality of those presences, the fact of being allowed into the room where something irreversible was happening, was the category of thing I had associated with him for 25 years. I'm saying this not to dramatize the betrayal, but to be accurate about the weight of it. When a person you met last year steals from you, the theft is the injury. When a person who has been the context for a quarter century of your life steals from you, the theft is accompanied by the retrospective revision of everything that context contained, and the revision is its own separate injury, and they compound each other in ways that are difficult to separate. He had come to the coffee shop on a Tuesday afternoon in March. I had been working from home, which was standard for me. I was a software engineer, independent contractor, the kind of work that travels with you and requires nothing but connectivity and the willingness to maintain the discipline of output without external structure. Sarah was at work. Our daughter Maya was in 2nd grade. The apartment was quiet in the specific, productive way of a Tuesday afternoon when the city is at its professional obligations, and you are at yours. Mark had texted at noon, "Coffee, I have something I want to talk to you about, kind of exciting." I had met him at the place 2 blocks from our apartment at 2 o'clock. He was there when I arrived, which was unusual. Mark was constitutionally incapable of punctuality, a habit I had absorbed over 25 years as simply a feature of him rather than a failing. His being there first was information, though I hadn't processed it as such at the time. He had a presentation on his laptop. He turned it toward me across the table and talked me through it, a tech logistics company, a Series A funding round, a specific opportunity for early investors at a valuation that would look, in 12 months, like the kind of decision people wrote articles about. He had the language of it right, which was not surprising. Mark had always been good at language, at the convincing texture of a thing, at saying what needed to be said in the register that made it land with the right weight. He had worked in sales for most of his adult life, and the specific skill set of sales, understanding what the person across from you needs to hear and providing it in the most credible possible form, was a skill that transferred. "I know this is big," he said. He was looking at me with the expression I had seen on his face in rooms where he was asking for something he needed, which had happened a handful of times over 25 years. And the expression was the same as it always was, earnest, slightly vulnerable, the look of a man extending trust by showing that he is extending it. "I wouldn't bring it to you if I wasn't sure. You know that." I did know that, or I believed I did, which was the same thing as knowing it at the time. I asked the questions you ask. He had answers, well-prepared, specific, with the texture of documentation behind them. He mentioned auditors, showed me what appeared to be a term sheet, named a firm I recognized. I was a software engineer, not a financial analyst, and the due diligence I was capable of performing on an investment opportunity was limited by what I understood and what I had time to verify. I told him I'd think about it. He said the window was closing, end of the week, the round was oversubscribed. He had got me priority access as a favor from the lead investor who was a mutual contact, and if I wasn't in by Friday it would be closed. The window is closing pressure was something I had read about in articles about investment fraud. I had read those articles. I had noted the technique. I should have noted it differently. The transfer happened on Thursday. Not all of it immediately. I had told him a number, the number I could move without requiring Sarah's signature on a joint account, and I had moved it through an interface I had specified for the transaction. This was the part that mattered. This was the part that Mark had not understood, because Mark understood people and language and the convincing texture of a thing, but he did not understand software engineering at the level that I understood it, which was the level at which the things that look like standard features are actually decisions about what those features do and to whom they do it. The interface I had specified was one I had built, not for this transaction specifically. I had built it 18 months earlier as part of a security research project for a client who needed a payment gateway with enhanced authentication logging. The specific feature that mattered for the current situation was a location tracking API I had implemented as a security measure. Every time the digital wallet associated with the transaction touched a public network, Wi-Fi, a payment terminal signal, a device access point, it sent a timestamp coordinate to a server I controlled, disguised as a routine server handshake in the transaction protocol. It was not legally ambiguous. The terms of service for the interface, which Mark had accepted when I had walked him through setting up the wallet for the transfer, specified that location data was collected for security verification purposes. He had accepted the terms. He had not read them. I had built the tracking into the system because I was a software engineer who thought about security the way software engineers think about security. Not because I had suspected Mark, specifically, of planning to steal from me. I had suspected in the general, professional way of someone who builds payment infrastructure for a living, that transactions of significant value carried risk, and that risk mitigation was the correct engineering response to risk. The irony of it, that I had built the system that would find him not because I mistrusted him, but because I was in the habit of engineering for the worst case, was something I had time to think about on the drive from the Midwest to Nevada. The morning it became relevant was a Friday. I had been up early, the specific early of someone whose internal clock woke them before the alarm because the preceding day had contained information their brain was still processing. I had made coffee. I had checked my email, nothing from the investment firm. I opened the tracking dashboard on the server, which was running as a background process I checked periodically the way you check on systems you are monitoring. Not with urgency, just with the routine attention of a person responsible for their own infrastructure. Mark's wallet had been active at 2:47 a.m. The coordinate it returned was not our city. I sat with that for a moment. I called his number. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail, the impersonal voicemail of a number that had been set up and not customized, not the voicemail I had been leaving messages on for 25 years. I called the office number from the presentation. A recording told me the number was not in service. I drove to the address on the presentation, a commercial building, the kind with suites you could rent monthly for the appearance of an office without the commitment of a lease. The suite number had a paper placard with a company name that was not the company from the presentation, and that had clearly been there for longer than the preceding week. The building manager, when I found him, had no record of a tenant matching the company name Mark had shown me. I drove home. I sat at my desk. The tracking dashboard showed Mark's wallet in motion, moving westward on a network of highway stops, each one generating a coordinate and a timestamp, the digital record of a man putting distance between himself and what he had done with the specific, deliberate speed of someone who had planned the departure in advance of the theft, which meant he had always planned the theft. I thought about the coffee shop. The laptop turned toward me across the table. The expression I had read as earnest vulnerability and which I now understood as something else. The calibrated performance of a person who knew that what they were asking for required the appearance of trust extended rather than extracted. I thought about Maya, about the number I had moved, about Sarah, who didn't know yet and who was going to have to be told, and about the specific, dreaded conversation of telling someone that a decision you made has cost them something they trusted you not to cost them. I sat at the desk for 40 minutes. Then I opened a new window on the tracking dashboard. I pulled up the coordinate history, every ping from the moment of the transfer through the present moment. A digital breadcrumb trail stretching from our city westward through 4 state lines to a cluster of signals that had been stationary for the past 6 hours in the vicinity of Las Vegas, Nevada. I looked at it. He was in Las Vegas, with my family's savings, in a city that exists for exactly the purpose he appeared to be putting it toward. I thought about calling the police. I had already done the math on that during the drive to the empty office, the timeline of a fraud report, the investigation process, the recovery rate for wire transfer fraud, which I had looked up on my phone in the parking lot of the commercial building, and which was, in the general case, not a number that produced confidence in the outcome. The money had moved through a wallet rather than a wire transfer, which added complexity. Mark had 25 years of knowing how to be persuasive, and his version of events would be that I had voluntarily invested in a venture that had not performed. I was a software engineer. I had built the tracking system. I had the coordinate history. I had a specific, documented digital record of everywhere the wallet had been since the moment of the transfer. What I needed was the right people to hand it to, in the right sequence at the right moment. I opened my laptop bag. I put my laptop in it. I put the charging cable in it. I put the tracking dashboard's export, a JSON file containing every coordinate, every timestamp, every network access event in the record, onto a USB drive and put that in the bag's front pocket. I went to the bedroom. I packed 4 days of clothes. I wrote Sarah a note, not the full explanation which she deserved and which I would give her when I had something better than devastation to accompany it, but enough. Something happened. I'm handling it. I'll explain everything. Don't touch the joint account. I love you. I picked up the bag. I looked at the tracking dashboard one more time. The coordinate was still stationary. Las Vegas, the Aurelius Casino. He had been there for 6 hours. I went to my car and started driving west. He drove through the night, not recklessly, at the speed limit, with the specific, controlled attention of someone who understood that arriving was the objective, and that anything that delayed arrival was counterproductive. He stopped twice for gas and once for coffee, and at each stop he checked the tracking dashboard, and at each check the coordinate was moving or stationary in patterns consistent with a man who had decided he was safe and was navigating accordingly. Mark stopped for the night in Amarillo, Texas. The wallet's last ping of the evening came at 11:47 from a network Ethan identified, through the access point's SSID in the log, as belonging to a mid-range hotel chain near the interstate. The coordinate was stationary from 11:47 through the following morning, which meant Mark had checked in, slept, and was not yet moving when Ethan crossed the Oklahoma-Texas border at 6:14 a.m. Ethan pulled into a truck stop outside Amarillo at 7 and bought a breakfast sandwich he ate in the car while the dashboard refreshed. He was not hungry. He ate it because his body required fuel the same way the car did, and skipping that requirement for emotional reasons was an inefficiency he was not willing to introduce into the current operation. He had started thinking of it as an operation somewhere around the Kansas state line, which was where the grief had finished its initial phase, and something colder and more functional had settled in behind it. The grief was still there. It did not go anywhere. It had simply been relocated to a compartment that was not the one he was operating from right now. The compartment he was operating from was the one he used at work, the one that assessed systems and identified leverage points and built solutions that were specific to the problem rather than general to the feeling. The problem was documented. The solution was in progress. At 8:15, the wallet pinged from a breakfast location 4 blocks from the hotel, a network associated with a chain restaurant, the kind of place that offered free Wi-Fi and grand slam breakfasts and the comfortable anonymity of a location that served 600 people a day and remembered none of them. Mark was eating breakfast. He was, the coordinate suggested, approximately 1.3 miles from where Ethan was sitting in a truck stop parking lot eating a breakfast sandwich he didn't taste. He did not go to the restaurant. He waited. At 9:40, the wallet began moving again. The coordinate progression. Ethan had built a visualization layer on top of the raw data, a simple map display that showed the trail as a line rather than a series of points, moved from the restaurant through the hotel, and then west on the interstate, the ping frequency increasing whenever Mark passed through a populated area with dense Wi-Fi coverage, and decreasing on the open highway stretches where the only networks were the sparse, high-power signals of roadside infrastructure. Ethan pulled back onto the interstate at 9:47, 11 minutes behind the last stationary ping. The documentation had begun in the hotel parking lot the previous evening, before he slept for 3 hours in the reclined driver's seat with his phone alarm set for 6. He had the coordinate history export, every ping since the transfer, timestamped and mapped. He had the terms of service document from the interface, with Mark's acceptance timestamp which established the legal basis for the tracking. He had the bank confirmation of the transfer which showed the originating account, the receiving wallet address, and the amount. He had a voice recording of the Tuesday coffee shop meeting, which he had made not because he had suspected fraud at the time, but because he recorded important professional conversations habitually, a practice he had developed after a contract dispute 3 years earlier that had been resolved in his favor partly because of a recording he had made without specific anticipation of needing it. The recording documented Mark describing the investment opportunity, naming the company, naming the lead investor, and characterizing the opportunity as guaranteed. In a fraud prosecution, the word asterisk guaranteed in the context of an investment opportunity carries specific legal weight. Ethan had noted this with a timestamp in the documentation. He had also, during the drive through Oklahoma, begun the research that produced the information that changed the shape of the operation. Mark's name, run through public records databases that Ethan had access to through a professional subscription, returned a history that the Tuesday coffee shop meeting had not included. 2 civil judgments from separate plaintiffs in separate states, both within the preceding 4 years, both for fraudulent misrepresentation in investment context. The amounts were smaller than what Mark had taken from Ethan. The pattern of escalation was consistent with a practitioner who had been refining a method. The third result was not a civil judgment. It was a corporate filing, 18 months old, for an LLC registered in Nevada under a name that appeared in no other public record. The LLC's registered agent was a law firm that specialized in the kind of corporate formation that prioritized structural opacity over operational substance. The single listed member of the LLC was not Mark's name. It was a name Ethan didn't recognize. He ran the name. The name appeared in 2 places. A civil case from 3 years earlier, settled under seal, which told him only that there had been a case and that its resolution was not public. And a federal court filing from 18 months ago, not a criminal case, but a civil RICO action, which was the kind of filing that appeared when the plaintiffs were not individual consumers, but organized entities with the resources to pursue organized crime theories in federal court. Ethan sat with that for a while on the Texas interstate, the cruise control holding the car at 74 miles per hour, the coordinate on his phone showing Mark somewhere ahead of him on the same highway. A civil RICO action, the kind that appears when the people who have been defrauded are the kind of people who pursue fraud through means that are available to them beyond the court system. He spent 40 minutes of the drive researching the RICO case's public filings, with the specific, methodical attention of someone who understood that the information he was finding was not incidental to the operation but was changing its architecture. What he found was partial. The case had been dismissed on jurisdictional grounds, which was a procedural outcome that did not resolve the underlying dispute, only the venue in which it was being pursued. The underlying dispute involved approximately $2.8 million and a group of plaintiffs whose names did not appear on the public filing, but whose legal representation was a firm that Ethan, after 40 minutes of reading, understood was not the kind of firm retained by people who had no alternative recourse. Mark had taken money from people who did not use courts as their primary instrument of recourse. He had apparently done this approximately 18 months ago, and had then spent 18 months navigating the consequences of it with the specific, unsustainable energy of someone who is very good at convincing people of things, and has convinced himself that this skill is a long-term strategy rather than a finite resource. Ethan updated the documentation. He added a section titled *Additional Victims Profile Summary and began populating it with what the research had produced, organized by source and confidence level, with timestamps on each entry. He was not building the documentation for his own satisfaction. He was building it for the people who would need it. The FBI field office he had identified in Albuquerque as his next logistical stop, where he would present the complete package in person, because presenting it in person was more credible than presenting it remotely, and credibility was a variable he was not willing to manage suboptimally. He reached Albuquerque at 2 in the afternoon on the second day. He parked outside the federal building, took the USB drive and the printed documentation package from his bag, and walked into the building. The meeting with the duty agent took 40 minutes. Ethan had organized the presentation the way he organized system documentation, sequentially, with each element's relationship to the following element made explicit, the technical components explained in terms accessible to a non-technical audience without sacrificing precision. He showed the agent the tracking dashboard, the coordinate history, the terms of service acceptance timestamp, the bank confirmation, the voice recording, the civil judgment history, and the corporate filing that connected Mark to the entities involved in the RICO action. The agent looked at it with the focused, unhurried attention of a federal law enforcement officer assessing the quality of evidence being presented to them, which was different from the attention of a civilian and which Ethan recognized as favorable. "The wallet is currently active," the agent said. "Stationary," Ethan said. "Las Vegas, the Aurelius, it's been there for," he checked the dashboard, 6 hours and 12 minutes as of right now. The agent looked at him. "You drove from?" "Yes," Ethan said. "And you're continuing to Las Vegas?" "After this meeting, yes." The agent looked at the documentation. "I'm going to need to route this to our Las Vegas field office. The jurisdiction is theirs. I can initiate the transfer and flag it as time-sensitive." He paused. "The additional victim profile, the RICO-adjacent entities. Do you have contact information?" "No, I have the corporate filing and the law firm of record for the civil case." The agent wrote it down. "Give me 24 hours to have the Las Vegas office review this and determine warrant viability. Don't do anything that would compromise their operation." "I understand," Ethan said. He did not say that he had already sent the documentation to the law firm of record for the RICO civil case, through a secure message channel he had identified on their website, 40 minutes before the FBI meeting. He did not say this because the agent had not asked, and because the information was not relevant to what the FBI was going to do next, and because Ethan's operation had multiple components and the FBI was one of them but not the only one. He drove the remaining distance to Las Vegas that evening. He arrived at 1 in the morning. He checked into a motel 2 miles from the Aurelius in the specific functional category of accommodation chosen for proximity and anonymity rather than comfort. He set his phone alarm for 6. The coordinate was stationary. Mark was sleeping somewhere in the Aurelius, or adjacent to it, in the specific, untroubled sleep of a man who believed he had outrun everything. Ethan lay on the motel bed with the tracking dashboard open on his phone and let his eyes close. He was not outrunning everything. He was at the end of a line that Ethan had been holding for 3,000 miles, and tomorrow was the morning the line became something else. He spent the following day watching, not physically, not in the casino, not in any position that might cause Mark to see him before the operation was complete, because being seen was a variable that could disrupt the timing in ways Ethan was not willing to introduce. He watched through the dashboard, from the motel room, tracking the wallet's movement through the Aurelius's infrastructure. The casino floor's dense network coverage generating pings at 3 to 5 minute intervals, the coordinates stable within the building's footprint, moving between what the floor layout he had downloaded from the casino's hospitality website suggested were the table gaming area, the restaurant, and what appeared to be a hotel room in the east wing. Mark had checked into the hotel. He was living in the casino. This was consistent with the behavioral profile of someone who had arrived at a destination they had been moving toward and had decided to inhabit it completely before the reality of what they had done caught up with them. The FBI Las Vegas field office called at 11:47 a.m. A different agent than Albuquerque, a woman named Reyes whose manner was efficient and whose questions were specific. "The warrant application is viable based on the documentation package," she said. "The wire fraud elements are solid. We're including the additional victim connection as a secondary thread, but leading with what we have from you, it's cleaner and it's sufficient." Timeline, Ethan said. "We're looking at tomorrow morning. The casino's security director has been briefed and is cooperating. We need you to not enter the premises until we've executed." "Understood," Ethan said. "One more thing," a brief pause. "The law firm you contacted, the one representing the civil RICO plaintiffs. They called us this morning." Ethan said nothing. "They've been looking for your subject for 8 months, Reyes said. "They're aware of our warrant and have agreed to coordinate. Their clients are not going to be in the casino tomorrow morning." "Thank you," Ethan said. "Thank you," she said. "This documentation is exceptional." He ended the call. He opened his laptop. He pulled up the coordinate history one more time, the full trail, 3,000 miles of it, every ping from the Tuesday morning transfer through the current moment. A line on a map that began in a mid-sized Midwestern city and ended in a casino in Nevada. The complete digital record of a man who had taken everything Ethan had built and run with it, and left a trail he didn't know he was leaving. He exported the visualization as a PDF. He filed it with the rest of the documentation. Then he closed the laptop and sat in the motel room with the air conditioning running, and the Las Vegas light coming through the gap in the curtains, and thought about Maya, about what he was going to tell her when he was home, about the conversation with Sarah, which he had rehearsed partially, and which he understood would be longer and harder than any single rehearsal had prepared him for, and which would require him to be present in a way that the preceding 4 days had not. He was going to be present, he was going to be home. He just needed tomorrow morning to finish. He checked the dashboard one final time. The coordinate was stationary in the casino's table gaming area. Mark was at the tables this late in the evening, with what had been Ethan's family's savings converted to chips, playing the game he had apparently always been playing, the one where he was smarter than everyone else in the room, and where the rules were for other people, and where the consequences of being wrong were always going to be someone else's to absorb. Ethan set his phone down. He slept. He arrived at the Aurelius at 8:47 the following morning, which was earlier than he had planned but consistent with the coordinates' behavior. Mark's wallet had pinged from the table gaming area at 8:15, which meant he had either not slept or had slept briefly and returned, the behavior of someone in the specific, compressed relationship with time that casino environments produce in people who are spending money that does not feel real, because it arrived too quickly to have acquired the weight of the thing it replaced. He was wearing the suit from the Phoenix airport store. He had a press credential lanyard around his neck from a technology conference that had taken place at the Aurelius the preceding month, obtained through a media registration process he had completed online the previous morning. Because a man in a suit with a credential lanyard in a casino is a man whose presence in the environment has a plausible professional explanation, and plausible professional explanations reduced the probability of being noticed by the person he needed not to notice him. He entered through the main floor entrance and moved into the body of the casino with the unhurried pace of a man who had somewhere to be inside the building, and was navigating toward it without urgency. The Aurelius's table gaming area was in the building's center, separated from the slot floor by a low architectural partition and a change in carpet pattern that the casino's designers had used to signal a transition between casual and serious. He moved through the transition and found a position behind a row of high-denomination slot machines with clear sightlines to the blackjack section. Mark was at a table near the center of the section. He was playing blackjack with the settled, proprietary posture of someone who had been at the table long enough to feel that the table belonged to them. His chips in organized stacks, his drink at his right hand. His body leaned slightly forward in the way of a player who is engaged with the game rather than merely present at it. He was talking to the dealer, and the dealer was responding with the professional warmth of someone whose job required responding. And Mark was interpreting the response as genuine warmth, which was the interpretation he had always made of professional warmth. The chip stacks were significant. Ethan did not need to count them precisely. The denomination visible from his position, multiplied by the approximate stack heights, produced a number that was roughly consistent with what remained of the transfer after 2 days of expenditure. Mark had been spending, but not catastrophically. He had been enjoying himself at a sustainable pace, the pace of someone who believed the resource was large enough to enjoy rather than exhaust. He was wrong about the resource. He had been wrong about it since Tuesday. Ethan's phone showed a text from Agent Reyes at 9:04, in position, 12 minutes. He looked at the clock above the cashier's cage on the far side of the gaming floor. 9:04. 12 minutes put the execution at 9:16, which was the window the Las Vegas field office had coordinated with the casino's security director, a window chosen for the specific quality of casino traffic at that hour. The overnight crowd thinned, the daytime crowd not yet arrived, the floor populated at a level that was public enough to be witnessed and sparse enough to be managed. He sent a text to the floor manager, whose number he had obtained the previous evening through the casino's hospitality contact line, identified himself by the name in the press credential, and included a single line: the player at table 7 blackjack section. The federal agents outside have a warrant. They'll be through your main entrance in approximately 11 minutes. Your security director has been briefed. The floor manager's response came in 40 seconds. Confirmed, security standing by. Ethan put the phone in his pocket. He looked at Mark one more time. Mark had just received his cards. He looked at them with the specific, evaluating attention of a man who is present in the game, not distracted, not performing, genuinely engaged with the decision in front of him. This was the version of Mark that had always been most dangerous and most convincing. The version that was fully present in whatever moment it was inhabiting, that brought its complete attention to the immediate thing, that made the immediate thing feel like the only thing. It was the version that had sat across a coffee shop table and turned a laptop toward a person who had been his friend for 25 years, and made the investment opportunity feel like the only thing. Ethan watched him make his decision. He doubled down. The dealer produced a card. Mark turned it over. He smiled, the private smile of a person who has just been correct about something and is taking a moment to acknowledge it to themselves before returning their attention to the next hand. 2 men in tailored suits appeared at the edge of the blackjack section from the east entrance. They moved through the floor with the measured, parallel efficiency of people who had navigated this kind of space before, who understood the social architecture of a casino floor, where people looked and where they didn't, how to move without generating the particular quality of attention that surveillance cameras caught and human peripheral vision registered. They were not law enforcement. Their movement was not law enforcement movement. It was something else, something that had its own professional language, and they were fluent in it. They were not going to reach the table before the agents did. Ethan had understood this when he sent the message to Agent Reyes, and he had understood it as a feature rather than a complication. The agents would reach the table first, which meant what happened to Mark subsequently would be a matter for the federal system rather than for the men in tailored suits, which was the outcome that was correct both legally and practically, because the federal system produced outcomes that were documentable and permanent, while the other kind produced outcomes that were neither. And Ethan had not driven 3,000 miles to produce an outcome that was neither. He had driven 3,000 miles to produce a documented, permanent outcome. At 9:14, 4 federal agents entered the Aurelius through the main entrance. They moved across the casino floor with the specific quality of purposeful movement that is distinct from the casino's ambient movement in a way that anyone paying attention could identify. And several of the floor staff were paying attention, and the security cameras were paying attention, and the floor manager standing near the cage was paying attention. And Mark was not paying attention because Mark was looking at his cards. They reached table 7 at 9:16. The lead agent said Mark's full name. The table went still, the specific stillness that a casino table achieves when a hand stops being a hand and becomes something else. Mark looked up from his cards with the expression of a man hearing his name said in a register he had not expected in this environment, and in the fraction of a second between hearing his name and processing who was saying it, and why, his face showed something that Ethan could see from 15 feet behind a row of slot machines, and which was the most honest thing he had seen on Mark's face since the Tuesday coffee shop. It was the expression of a person understanding that the calculation they believed they had completed has more terms in it than they accounted for. "Mark Calloway," the agent said again. "Federal agents, please stand and keep your hands visible." Mark stood. He stood with the specific, controlled compliance of a person who has decided that compliance at this moment is the only viable option. Because something in the quality of the agent's approach, the number of them, the configuration, the presence of the casino security personnel moving to positions at the table's perimeter, had communicated to him that the situation was not one that his usual instruments, the language and the performance and the specific, practiced convincingness, were going to navigate. He looked around the table, not for escape, for comprehension. The expression of a man trying to understand the size of what had arrived. His eyes moved across the floor in the searching way of someone looking for something specific. Ethan could not know for certain what he was looking for. He might have been looking for the person who had found him, the same way a person caught in a system they didn't know they were in looks for the point of entry, the place where the thing that found them came from. He didn't find Ethan. The slot machines were between them, and Ethan was not in the position of a person wanting to be found. The agent directed Mark's hands behind his back. The handcuffs were applied with the efficient, practiced motion of a procedure performed many times and stripped of anything unnecessary. One of the agents collected the chip stacks from the table evidence, to be catalogued and held pending the investigation and the recovery process that would eventually return a portion of them to the people from whom they had come. The two men in tailored suits had stopped moving when the agents entered. They were standing at the periphery of the section now, observing, with the composed attention of people who have arrived to do a thing, and have found that the thing is being done by someone else and have adjusted their presence accordingly. They would leave, Ethan understood, when it was appropriate to leave, and they would communicate what they had observed to whoever had sent them. And the people who had sent them would make their own determinations about what came next, within the constraints that the federal proceeding now established. The agents walked Mark across the casino floor toward the main entrance. The casino floor watched him go, the specific, suspended quality of public observation in a space that exists for distraction and is suddenly providing something more immediate than any of the distractions it offers. Dealers at adjacent tables, players mid-hand, the cashier's cage staff, the floor manager near the cage, whose phone was in his hand and who was watching with the professional attention of someone whose venue has just been the location of a federal arrest, and who is considering the report he will need to file. Ethan watched from behind the slot machines until Mark and the agents had passed through the main entrance doors and were outside. Then he looked at his phone. The tracking dashboard showed the wallet signal stationary at the table location. Mark's phone and the digital wallet, both now in the custody of the federal agents, their signals no longer moving. The coordinate that had been traveling for 3,000 miles had come to rest. He put the phone in his jacket pocket. He walked out of the casino through a side exit that opened onto a parking structure, in the opposite direction from where the agents had taken Mark. And he found his car in the structure's second level where he had parked it that morning. And he sat in it for a moment with his hands on the wheel, and the parking structure's fluorescent light falling across the dashboard. He thought about the Tuesday coffee shop, the laptop turned toward him across the table, the 25 years. He thought about Maya, second grade, the specific, unguarded quality of a 7-year-old's trust, which was different from adult trust in the way that things built without calculation are different from things built with it. more complete, more fragile. The trust of someone who has not yet accumulated the information that makes trust a decision rather than a condition. He was going to go home and explain to Sarah what had happened, and Sarah was going to be devastated, and then angry, and then, eventually, something more manageable than either of those things. Because Sarah had the specific, durable quality of a person who processes difficult information completely rather than partially, and who comes out the other side of the processing with a clearer view than she had before it. He had married her partly because of this quality, and he had come to rely on it in the years since, in ways he had never articulated to her but which were real. He started the car. Agent Reyes called at 11:17, while Ethan was on the interstate heading east. "We've completed the intake," she said. "The chip recovery is going into the evidence fund pending the investigation. Based on the documentation you provided, the recovery process for your specific portion should be straightforward. The transfer confirmation and the wallet tracking establish a clean chain. The U.S. Attorney's Office will be in touch about the timeline." "How long?" Ethan said. 6 to 8 months for the asset recovery conservatively. The criminal proceeding will take longer." A brief pause. "He had additional funds on him. Cash and a second wallet we weren't aware of from your documentation. There are additional victims we'll be identifying through those instruments." "I understand. One more thing." Another pause, the quality of a person deciding how much to say. "The two individuals who were in the casino this morning, the ones who came in from the east entrance." Ethan said nothing. "We're aware of who they represent," Reyes said. "And we're aware that your subject has an outstanding, let's call it a debt, with those parties. Federal custody complicates their ability to collect that debt directly. But federal custody also has a geography, and the geography includes facilities where the outstanding debt and the people who hold it are present in ways that are difficult to manage." She paused. "I'm telling you this so that you understand the full picture of your subject's situation, not because it changes our proceeding." "I understand," Ethan said. "Drive safe," she said. He drove. The interstate east of Las Vegas was the specific, wide-open landscape of the American desert in the morning. Flat, enormous, the kind of terrain that makes human concerns seem appropriately scaled by comparison. He drove through it at the speed limit with the cruise control set, and his phone on the seat beside him and the tracking dashboard closed, because the tracking dashboard had served its purpose and was no longer a live instrument. He called Sarah at 1 in the afternoon, when he had cleared the Nevada state line and was in Utah with 4 hours of driving ahead of him. She answered on the second ring. "Ethan?" Her voice had the quality it had when she had been waiting for something, and had not allowed herself to define what she was waiting for, because defining it would have required deciding what to do if the definition turned out to be the bad version. "I'm driving home," he said. "I'm in Utah, I'll be there tonight." A silence. "Are you?" "I'm fine," he said. "I need to tell you something, and I'm going to tell you all of it, and it's going to be a long conversation, and I'd rather have it in person. But I want you to know right now that I'm coming home, and that the situation is handled, and that we're going to be okay." She was quiet for a moment. He could hear her breathing, and beyond that the ambient sound of their apartment, the specific acoustic signature of a space he knew so well that he could identify which room she was in from the echo quality. She was in the kitchen. "Maya has a school thing tonight," she said. "A performance she's been practicing." "What time?" 7. He did the math. He could make it. "I'll be there," he said. She didn't ask anything else. He drove. The performance was in the school's gymnasium. The folding chairs arranged in rows facing a low stage that had been decorated by the second-grade teachers with the specific, earnest effort of people who understood that their students' audience would find the effort meaningful regardless of its polish. The gymnasium smelled of industrial cleaner and popcorn from the concession table in the lobby, and the lights were the gymnasium's regular fluorescent overhead lights with a few supplementary spots aimed at the stage. And it was exactly the right environment for what was happening in it. Ethan arrived at 6:52, still in the airport suit, and found Sarah in the third row. She looked at him when he sat down beside her with the full attention she brought to things she needed to understand completely. And he looked back at her with the expression he used when he was telling the truth about something difficult, and wanted her to know that he intended to keep telling it. She took his hand. On the stage, a line of 7-year-olds in costume was arranging itself with the chaotic sincerity of children who have rehearsed something and are now in the moment of performing it, and are both terrified and certain simultaneously, which was the condition of being 7 years old in a gymnasium in front of your parents. Maya found them in the audience from the stage. He watched her face when she found his face, the specific, unguarded quality he had been thinking about in the car, the expression of a child whose trust is a condition rather than a decision, and who has just confirmed that the person it is directed toward is present. She waved. He waved back. The performance began. He sat in the folding chair in the gymnasium that smelled of industrial cleaner and popcorn, with Sarah's hand in his, watching his daughter on a low stage decorated by second-grade teachers. And he let the preceding 4 days finish settling into the past tense where they belonged, which was where they would remain. Mark was in federal custody. The money was in an evidence fund that would return a substantial portion of it, in time, through a process that had been set in motion by a documentation package assembled in motel rooms and parking lots across 3,000 miles. The additional situation, the debt, the geography of federal facilities, the men in tailored suits who had stood at the periphery of a casino floor and watched a warrant executed and communicated what they had observed to the people who sent them, was not something Ethan had arranged. It was something that had arranged itself from the materials that Mark had spent his life assembling, and that had finally achieved their natural configuration. He had not gone to Las Vegas to arrange that. He had gone to Las Vegas because that was where the coordinate led. And because the coordinate led there because Mark had used a wallet that Ethan had built. And Mark had used it because he had trusted that Ethan was not the kind of person who built things with the worst case in mind. He was exactly that kind of person. He had always been exactly that kind of person. It was the thing that made him good at his work. He thought he didn't steal my money, Ethan thought, watching Maya find her mark on the stage. He stole the future I promised my family. He thought he was betting with my life savings. He thought he was actually placing a wager on his own funeral. Maya began to sing. The gymnasium was full of parents recording on phones, and the fluorescent overhead lights were doing what they always did, and the stage decorations were exactly what second-grade teachers had made them. And it was entirely, completely ordinary. And ordinary was exactly the right word for what Ethan had driven 3,000 miles to return to. He listened to his daughter sing. He was home,